All right, good evening. How is everyone tonight? And where are my captions? Always with the damn captions. All right, we'll get it fixed quick enough. Y'all know the drill. They time out every 48 hours, and I always forget to redo that link. All right, there we are. And we are on Chapter 3 of Crosscurrent. So we're going to be on this book a while, and a few others before we get back to the rest of the Fall of the Sith Empire comics. So sit back and enjoy. All right, and if you haven't seen the other two, just as a reminder, this book jumps back and forth between 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin and 41.5 years after. So, no real good way to break that up. I'm not sure it's intended to be broken up. I mean, obviously they put the two together because there's a link somewhere. So, every chapter starts off, so far anyway, at 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. So, here we go. Relin started to lose forward momentum the instant he leapt clear of the airlock. He activated the magnetic grips in his gloves and boots as he fell. Time seemed to slow as he plummeted toward the transport, and an image of the transport against the background of stars burned itself into his memory. Remaining focused, holding the ship in his telekinetic grasp, he steered his descent and reeled himself in. He could not afford to slow himself with the force, and he hit the surface of the ship hard, thumping his helmet on the hull and for a moment scrambling the HUD. The transport lurched the moment he alit, and the sudden shift in momentum nearly threw him. He cursed and grabbed the protuberances nearest to hand. The force and his magnetic grips kept him anchored. For an instant he feared a scan by the transport crew had detected his presence, but the ship had swerved left and down, probably an evasive maneuver in response to the detection of the infiltrator. Drev would be under pressure soon. Relin had to move fast. He hung onto the transport as it sped toward the dreadnoughts. Harbinger and Omen had long, sleek bodies dotted everywhere with batteries of rotating laser cannon turrets, typically used for ship-to-ship combat. And as he watched, the cannons rotated in the direction of the infiltrator, but they would have difficulty getting a fix on the small, stealth-equipped starfighter. In moments, a rapid reaction squad of Sith fighters like flying knives streaked from the bay. "Incoming," he said to Drev over the encrypted channel. 10 Blade-class fighters. Stay among the smaller craft and the dreadnoughts will not fire. He glanced back, but could not see Drev and the infiltrator. Could see only the dark side of Fagan 3, a handful of the transport shuttles going evasive, and the floating rock of the dead moon. He returned his gaze to the dreadnoughts and focused on his mission. The transport was making for Harbinger. Interior lights from observation decks and viewports flickered here and there along Harbinger's and Omen's lengths. In shape, the dreadnoughts reminded Relin of gigantic Lanvaroks, the bladed polearm favored by the Sith. The tumors of bubble-shaped escape pods lined the spine that connected the forward bridge section to the aft engine and landing bay sections. Like most Jedi, he studied the available schematics of Sith starships. He knew their layout, and he knew where he was going once he got aboard. The transport straightened its course, descended a bit, and headed for the bay. Relin estimated the time of arrival, removed 3 of the mag grenades from his flex suit, and crawled along the transport as fast as he dared, until he reached the housing for the engine nacelles. Nacelles. I think they stole... I don't remember them ever using that term in Star Wars. It's definitely used in Star Trek. Anyway, he stuck all 3 charges to one of the nacelles and waited. The moment the transport cleared the landing bay's shielding and started to slow, he activated them, put them on a 10-second timer, and began counting down in his head. 2 more blades sped past him and out of the ship. 10, 9. He worried for Drev. His Padawan was an extraordinary pilot, but the sky would be thick with Sith fighters. Relin would have to be fast. 8, 7. The activity in the landing bay gave it the appearance of an Eason hide? E-double-E-S-I-N. I'm going to say Eason hive. Pilots in full gear were carted in levs to their blades. Droids wheeled and walked here and there. Organics and machines unloaded open transports, and loaded what looked like raw ore onto lev pallets. The sight of the ore, the greasy feel of it, made Relin queasy. He remembered a moment years before when he and Sazed, then still a Jedi, had happened upon a crystal that enhanced a dark side user's connection to the Force. He shuffled through his memory until he recalled the name of the ore, lignin. The feel of it was the same. It had to be the same material. He had never imagined there could be so much. A female voice on the loudspeaker announced commands. Cargo droid Team 4 to landing bay 163B. Relin reached out with the Force and felt the mines around him as the transport settled into a landing bay and powered down its engines. Auto clamps secured its skids, and gases vented with a hiss. Relin discerned 10 or so beings nearby, none a Force user, all weak-minded. 5, 4. Using the Force, he entered their minds and erased himself from their perception. 3, 2. He leapt from the ship, hit the floor in a roll, found his feet, and ran. Augmenting his speed with the Force, he covered 100 meters in the tick of a chrono. 0. Behind him, the mag grenades blossomed into a cloud of flame and heat, and the secondary explosion from one or both of the transport's other engines rocked the landing bay. The concussion wave nearly knocked him from his feet. Shards of metal, chunks of flesh, screams, and sparkling motes of the transport ore peppered the area. The presence of the ore in its naked form made his stomach churn, and he took care as best he could to touch none of the particulates. An alarm screeched, and the crew near the wreckage scrambled for the firefighting gear. A medical droid wheeled past Relin. "Firefighting team to main landing bay," announced the female voice. Ears ringing, Relin hurried down a corridor in the direction of the hyperdrive chamber. He flipped back his helmet, letting it hang by the hinge at the rear of the suit's neck, and put the helmet's removable comlink in his ear. A firefighting team, several curious crew members, and 3 towering red-skinned Massassi in security uniforms stormed past him at intervals. He used the Force to deflect their perception as he hurried along. The interior of the ship reflected the mindset of its Sith builders. All hard edges, sharp corners, and pure functionality, with no allowance for comfort or aesthetics. The sound of the alarm grew fainter, and he allowed himself to feel a small sense of relief. He reached an intersection and paused for a moment to gather his bearings. He shuffled through the cards of his memory, recalling the direction of the hyperdrive chamber. Left, and not far. A hatch to his left slid open to reveal the muscular, vaguely reptilian form of a Massassi warrior in the deep black uniform and epaulets of security personnel. A Lanvarak hung across his back, a blaster on the trunk of his thigh. Bone quills poked from his knuckles. Metal ornaments pierced his wide nose and small ears. Studs had been implanted underneath the red skin of his forearms, biceps, and hairless scalp. The Massassi's eyes fixed on Relin before he could use the Force to blind his perception. The tentacles of the Massassi's beard quivered over his broad, toothy mouth. A vein in his temple visibly throbbed. "We need assistance in the landing bay," Relin said. "Something went wrong with the..." The Massassi took in Relin's flex suit, the lack of a uniform. His yellow eyes narrowed, and his clawed hands clutched the hilt of his Lanvarak, pulled it free. The large polearm could be spun by a wielder to release the sharpened metal discs mounted on its haft, or the jagged bladed end could serve as an axe, a crude weapon but dangerous. "Who is your superior?" the Massassi asked, his voice as guttural as calm static. The Massassi put the point of the Lanvarak on Relin's chest and pushed him up against the wall. Relin understood then how things would go. He looked up and down the corridor, saw no one. With his free hand, the Massassi pinched the comlink on his collar. "This is Drofan, Security Detail 5. I have a..." "My superior is Mehmet Nadil," Relin said. "Go ahead, Drofan," said the voice from the comlink. But Relin's words had creased the Massassi's forehead, and his fingers released the comlink. "Merut who?" "I do not know that name." "He is a Jedi Master on Kirek." "A Jedi what?" "Say again, Drofan. Your transmission fell off. Say again." Relin's words finally penetrated the Massassi's armor of incredulity, and his yellow eyes widened. He leaned into the Lanvarak as his hand went for his blaster. Relin projected a telekinetic blast from his palm, pushed the Massassi across the corridor, and slammed him against the wall. The impact summoned a gasp of pain and sent the blaster to the floor. The Massassi ignored it, growled, and lunged for Relin with the Lanvarak. Relin ignited his lightsaber, and the green blade met red flesh, severing an arm on the crosscut, then the head on the backswing. The Massassi corpse fell at Relin's feet. "Report, Drofan," said the voice of the Massassi's comlink. Relin saw no point in hiding the body. They would know he was aboard soon enough. Deactivating his lightsaber, he sprinted down the hall. He decided to risk a communication. "Drev?" "It's thick out here, Master, but I'm holding." Relin heard the tension in his Padawan's voice. The rumble of a near miss carried through the connection, along with Drev's grunt. "It's about to get thick in here too," Relin said. "Not much longer. Rely on the Force, Drev, and hang on." Sayes stalked the bridge. The susurrant rush of his robes, loud in the quiet. None of his crew met his eyes. On the view screen, the Jedi infiltrator weaved and darted through space, upward of 12 blades in pursuit. Laser fire crisscrossed the screen, a net of glowing lines. Frustrated comm chatter from the blade pilots carried over the bridge speakers. Sayes used the dark side to probe the infiltrator's pilot's connection to the Force and found him more of a potential than a fully realized Force user, though he was an extraordinarily intuitive pilot. He could not be alone. As Sayes watched, blades came at the infiltrator from two sides and the bottom, a claw encirclement. "They have him now," muttered a junior officer. The Jedi cut hard to the left and engaged a booster, blasting one of the blades from space as he did so, and gained some separation from the rest. Soft curses sounded from the bridge. "He's headed for another transport," Dora observed. The infiltrator wheeled around, and the transport pilot took evasive maneuvers, but it was far too little. The infiltrator's laser spat energy. The transport and its ore turned to dust. Sayes' anger grew. He could not afford to lose any of his ore. Out of habit, he tapped his forefinger on the point of one of his jaw horns. "Intensify scanning in system," Dor ordered the helm. "This Jedi cannot be alone. More will be coming." "Yes, Colonel." Sayes ground his fangs as the infiltrator weaved out of another trap laid for him by the blades. He glared at the weapons officer, a human male with gray at his temples and concern in his eyes. "Can you get a lock?" "No, Captain. The ship has some kind of sensor scrambler. We could blanket an area and bring him down even without a lock, but he's too near our ships." Sayes nodded. "Prepare a firing solution to provide a safe corridor for the transports. Transmit it to the Blades Navicomps to keep them clear." "Yes, Captain." Sayes turned to Dor. "End planet-side operations. Order every transport back to Harbinger and Omen. A firing corridor will be provided for them." "Yes, Captain," said Dor with a nod, and began transmitting the orders. "Firing solution ready, sir," said the weapons officer. "Fire," Sayes said. Harbinger's laser cannons put a curtain of flames in space, dividing the infiltrator and blades from the transports. The transports took immediate advantage and sped for the landing bays. "As soon as the transports are aboard, recall the blades," Sayes said to Dor. To his weapons officer he said, "Then you blow him from space." "What?" Dor said, and the exclamation turned heads on the bridge. For a moment, Sayes thought Dor to be questioning his order, but he soon saw otherwise. The colonel tilted his head into his earpiece. As he listened, his skin turned a deeper red, and his tentacled beard quivered with anger. "Double security around all sensitive areas. Establish search teams and comb the ship. Dor out." "What is it?" Sayes asked. Dor's beard twitched as he leaned in close to Sayes and spoke in a low tone. "The body of a security guard was found in the corridor off the landing bay. His arm and head were severed. It appears to have been the work of a lightsaber." Adrenaline fueled Sayes' pheromones, increasing their odor. "A lightsaber?" he muttered to himself. "Then the explosion in the bay was not an engine malfunction." "It appears not. We have a Jedi on board." A murmur went through the bridge crew. The smell of their sweat sweetened with excitement. Dor tapped his palm on the hilt of the Lanvarok he wore even on bridge duty. "If these Jedi are a vanguard for a larger force—" Sayes nodded. He could not take the chance. Sato would be displeased with a delay in the delivery of the lignin. To the helmsman he said, "Move us out of the planet's gravity well and prepare the ship for hyperspace. Plot a route to Primus Golud and jump as soon as all our ships are back on board." To Dor he said, "You have the bridge." Dor nodded. "Yes, sir." "What are you going to do?" Sayes put a hand on the hilt of his lightsaber. "I am going to retrieve my mask and find our stowaway. A captured Jedi," the two words look so much alike. "The captured Jedi would make a nice gift to accompany the lignin for Master Sado. Relin felt the mental fingers of his one-time Padawan and knew that the dead Masasi's body had been found. Sazed was searching for him. Relin resisted the impulse to lower his mental screen and reveal himself. He needed to accomplish his mission, not correct a past wrong. He hurried through the maze of corridors, using the force on groups of 2 or 3 crew to remove himself from their perception. The crew of Harbinger was on alert, searching for him, and Relin found it increasingly taxing to render himself hidden from them. Ahead, he heard the heavy tread of boots and the booming bass voices of several Masasi. From the sound of it, he put their numbers at 6 or 7. Given their alert status and attunement to the dark side, he would not be able to use the force to hide from them. He checked one of the nearby hatches, found it locked, checked another, found that locked too. The voices drew closer. He could not make out their words. They were speaking their native language. He pulled an overrider, an electronic lockpick, from his suit and attached it to the nearest door's control panel. Lights flashed as the equipment interfaced, and the overrider tried to find the door's open code. The Masasi were around the corner. Relin would not get clear in time. He took his lightsaber in hand and ignited it. The Masasi fell silent. They must have heard him activate his lightsaber. The overrider flashed green and the door opened with a metallic hiss. Moving quickly, he detached the overrider and slid inside as the Masasi rounded the corner. A meeting room, a large table surrounded by chairs and dotted with 3 comp stations, sat centermost. A vid screen, powered down, took up one wall. Transparent steel windows made up the bulkhead, allowing a view of the system outside. He crouched with his ear to the door, listening to the voices of the Masasi. They sounded like they were right outside, separated from him only by a thin layer of metal, talking in hushed tones. He winced as his comlink activated and Drev spoke. The transports are returning to the landing bay and both dreadnoughts are moving, Master. Relin heard laser fire in the background of Drev's transmission, but his mind was on the Masasi in the corridor outside. Stand by, he whispered. Stand by. The voices outside were silent. Had they heard Drev? A human would not have been able to hear the comlink transmission. But Masasi had keener senses than humans. Relin sat behind the door, lightsaber humming in his hand, the calm of the force in his heart, waiting, nothing. He glanced back out of the meeting room windows to see the background of stars shifting slightly as the ship moved away from Fagan 3 and its gravity well. They are preparing to jump, he said to Drev. He had to get to the hyperdrive, and now. Get off that ship, Master, or you'll go with them. There is still time. He pushed the button to open the hatch. I'm near the hyperdrive chamber, and... He found himself staring at the uniformed chest of a Masasi security officer, who held his Lanvarok in one hand. The bone spurs and studs under the Masasi's red flesh gave it a tumorous appearance. Here, the Masasi shouted down the hall, roaring. He swung his Lanvarok in a downstroke for Relin's head, but Relin sidestepped the blow and it slammed into the deck, while Relin drove his lightsaber through the Masasi's abdomen. The Masasi groaned, dropped his weapon. His clawed hands groped reflexively for Relin's throat as he died. Shouts from down the hall told Relin the dead Masasi's comrades had heard his call. He took a thermal grenade from his flex suit, stepped out of the room and tossed it down the corridor at the onrushing Masasi, each with a blaster and Lanvarok bare. Recognition of what he had thrown widened their eyes and they dived for cover, but not before one of them got off a blaster shot. Relin deflected it with his lightsaber and ducked back into the room he had vacated as the grenade exploded. Flames bathed the corridor in orange. The Masasi's screams were lost in the explosion, and the shock wave rattled Relin's teeth. Alarms shrieked, and fire foam hissed out of valves in the ceiling. Relin heard shouts from the other corridor and the stomp of many boots. The ship's entire security force would be coming, as would Say's. He had to move. He drew his blaster with his offhand and pelted down the hall, past the bodies of the Massassi, toward the hyperdrive chamber. The time for stealth was past. A pair of Massassi appeared in the hallway before him, both with blasters drawn. Before they could shoot, Relin dropped one with a shot from his own blaster, opening a smoking hole in the Massassi's black uniform and sending the insignia of rank on his chest skittering across the floor. The second Massassi fired his blaster rapidly while shouting for aid and backing away. Relin closed the distance, deflecting the blaster shots with his lightsaber as he ran, leaving a trail of scorch marks in his wake along the wall and ceiling. At 5 paces, the Massassi tried to draw his Lanvarok, but Relin lunged forward, and it was on him too fast. The clean hum of his lightsaber gave way to a muffled sizzle as he cut the Massassi in two. He could not slow. Shouts told him that pursuit was right behind him. Alarms were sounding all over the ship. When he reached a thick blast door, an idea struck him, and he drove his lightsaber tip into the control panel. The circuitry expired with smoke and sparks, and the blast door descended with a boom. He assumed his pursuers would be able to go descended. What? He assumed his pursuers would be able to go descended with a boom. That doesn't make any sense. Okay. He assumed his pursuers would be able to go around, but it might buy him a few extra moments. So there's a weird mixed-up sentence there. The circuitry expired with smokes and sparks, and the blaster door descended with a boom. He assumed his pursuers would be able to go around, but it might buy him a few extra moments. There we go. Drawing on the Force, he enhanced his speed and ran in a blur for the hyperdrive chamber. The young helmsman did not look up from his screen as he spoke to Dor. "Colonel, we are clear of the gravity well. System scans show no additional Jedi ships." Dor nodded. Begin the Begin the jump sequence. As the helmsman obeyed, the weapons officer said, "All blades are returned to the ship, Colonel Dor." Dor heard the question hiding behind the comment. "The infiltrator remains in range?" "Yes, Colonel." Dor stroked the tentacles of his beard. "You have until we jump to destroy it." The helm recited the jump sequence countdown. The weapons officer gave the order to the gun crews to fire at will. 8 Massassi warriors armed with blaster rifles and Lanvaroks loitered in the large open room adjacent to the hyperdrive chamber. The quills, lumps, and scars that scored their red flesh made them look deformed. Relin slowed only long enough to count their numbers and ensure there were no others. He did not bother to hide himself. They were too alert for that. They saw him, pointed, showed their teeth in a growl. 6 pulled their blaster rifles to their shoulders to fire, while another spoke into his comlink, and the last headed for the wall-mounted alarm. Without breaking stride, Relin held up a hand, took telekinetic hold of the blaster rifles aimed at him, ripped them from the Massassi's hands, and flung them across the large chamber. One fired when it hit the deck, and the shot blew the booted foot from one of the Massassi. He fell to the floor, cursing in his language, the ruins of his ankle leaking black fluid. Relin fired his blaster and put a fist-sized hole in the back of the skull of the Massassi about to push the wall alarm. Black blood and brain matter splattered the wall as the body slid to the floor. "Run," he said to the remaining Massassi. The 6 still standing grinned mouthfuls of sharp teeth, the teeth of predators, and drew their Lanvaroks. Spun them with skill until they hummed. Relin knew what was coming next. He would have to take care that his suit did not get damaged. As one of the Massassi jerked back on their Lanvaroks, a shower of the sharpened discs attached to the haft, each a few centimeters across, sprayed at Relin. Ready for it, he used the Force to augment an upward leap over the projectiles and reached almost all the way to the ceiling, 10 meters up. All but one of the discs flew harmlessly under him. The last scored his forearm, but it was little more than a scratch and did not seem to penetrate his suit. He landed in a crouch, lightsaber blazing. I said run. The largest said, "We are 6 to your 1, Jedi, with more coming." Relin tilted his head, holstered his blaster, and took his lightsaber in both hands. Through the large double doors behind the Massassi, Relin heard the hyperdrive hum with pre-jump preparation. Pressure built on his eardrums. The hairs on his arms stood on end. He had no time to waste. You will be fewer than 6 in a moment. Flee now. Final chance. They lost their smiles but not their fire, and charged him in a loose arc, roaring. He charged them in silence, focused, the force surging through his muscles. When he closed to 2 paces, he bound over them, flipping in midair and decapitating one as he landed behind their line. By the time they spun to face him, he put his lightsaber through a second. Sidestepping the downward slash of a Lanvarok from a third Massassi, he cut the metal weapon in half, ducked under a crosscut from another, and severed both legs of the nearest Massassi. He backflipped out of range, the screams of the dying loud in his ears. The large Massassi put his Lanvarok in the skull of the other whose legs Relin had severed, ending the screams. Then all 3 remaining snarled and charged. Relin threw his lightsaber at the first, impaling him through the neck. Surprise slowed the others a moment, and Relin took advantage of the reprieve to use the force to pull his weapon back into his hands. They licked their fangs, bounced on their feet, and charged anew. He met their advance with his own ducking, spinning, wheeling, slashing, killing. They could not match his speed, his skill, and within a 5 count, pieces of the Massassi and their weapons dotted the bloody deck. All were dead, but the one wounded on the foot by the blaster. "You must gift me with death too, Jedi," the wounded Massassi snarled. "This," he gestured at his wounded foot, "I will be as a child." Relin stared at him with contempt. He knew the Massassi had been bred as warriors, but their carelessness with their own lives sickened him. "We all live with ourselves." "Not like this. Kill me, I demand it." The Massassi crawled toward a blaster rifle, leaving a line of smeared blood in his wake. "As you'll have it then," Relin said, and put a blaster shot in his skull. Deactivating his lightsaber, still centered in the calm of the Force, he turned to the doors. Body and mind tingled with fatigue, but he endured. Behind the door, energy gathered around the hyperdrive. He could feel the change in the air. The dreadnoughts would jump soon. He would not be able to stop Omen, but at least he could stop Harbinger. He slipped the overrider over the control panel and hoped it would work quickly. Lights and beeps signified the beginning of a cryptographic hollow chess match. Relin could do nothing but wait. Despite the urgency of the moment, he put his back to the door, sat cross-legged on the floor, stared out and over a chamber of dead Massassi, and held his calm. Several corridors opened into the chamber, and Relin heard shouts down 2 of them. They were coming. The realization did nothing to disturb his calm. Taking comfort in his relationship to the Force, he held the hilt of his lightsaber in his hand, felt the coolness of his metal, studied its lines, recalled its making. A long beep signaled the overrider's victory. "Checkmate," Relin said, standing. The hyperdrive chamber's doors parted. Dry, warm air swarmed out. The gathering energy in the chamber created extreme static electricity. Relin's hair stood on end. Insects seemed to crawl over his flesh. His robes clung to him as if trying to prevent him from entering. The rectangular metal block of the hyperdrive hung in the center of the room from ceiling mounts and a series of power conduits as thick as Relin's arm. A large disc-shaped concavity in the floor yawned underneath it, the open mouth into which the drive fed its power. Circuitry crisscrossed the hyperdrive's face, the circulatory system of interstellar travel. A transparent steel window on the far side of the chamber opened onto an adjoining room. A pair of wide-eyed human engineers in the black uniforms of Sato's forces pointed at him, shouted something, and reached frantically for communicators. Relin used a telekinetic blast to slam both men against the far wall, and they slumped to the floor out of sight. Relin had seen a hyperdrive bisected once for engineers to study. The complexity of the circuitry, the odd geometry of its inner workings, had left him nauseous, and now that complexity, that geometry, began to do its work. Machinery clicked, connected, turned. The power conduits squirmed like snakes as more energy coursed through them. The hum increased in volume. Relin felt lightheaded. Radiation filled the room, he knew. He would need treatment for radiation poisoning if he survived. If. He placed a hand on the hyperdrive. The metal felt warm, as slick as talc. It pulsed like a living thing, seeming to shift, to flow under his touch. A headache rooted in his left temple intensified. His stomach flirted with nausea. He removed 3 of his mag grenades from the pocket of his flex suit, attached 2 of them to the face of the hyperdrive, a third to the main power conduit connection. He checked his chrono to mark the time and rapidly set timers. The grenades began to ticking away the remaining moments of Harbinger's existence. He turned to the door, activating his communicator. Charges are set. Heading out now, Drev. Understood. The blades have cleared out. Perhaps I have frightened them. Relin heard the beginning of a smile in his tone. Drev went on. I am alone out here, well, except for the 2 hulking dreadnoughts bristling with weapons. Relin stood amid the Misasi he had slaughtered. Jump out of the system. With their ships clear, the cannons may fire. They're preparing for a jump, Master. They won't risk firing. They may. Jump out, Drev. I am not leaving you. Jump, Drev. That is an order. No. Relin cocked his head. No? I'm not leaving, Master. Both ships are in jump prep. Neither will risk firing. Relin shook his head, incredulous at the Padawan's stand. You are leaving. Harbinger will not be able to jump, but Omen will. There's nothing we can do about that now. But we can warn Odin-Ur and Mernit Nadil about the ore and what it can do. That is your task. No, I won't. We go together or not at all. Relin lost his calm for the first time since coming aboard the dreadnought. You will do it, and do it now. That is a direct order. You're breaking up, Master. Blast it, Drev. You heard... Understood, Master. I will get in close, scrape the surface of the ship. The laser cannons from Omen will not be able to engage me there, and for Harbinger it will be like using a club to swat a fly. Get to an escape pod and we'll dock out, and they won't fire anyway. Out again. The link went quiet. Drev! Drev? His Padawan did not respond. Blast! You have a way of losing your Padawans, said a coarse voice behind him, a voice that Relin still heard in the quiet, solitary moments of his life when he had only his failures for company. Says, the word came out, a curse, and Relin accompanied its pronunciation with the sizzling sound that came with activation of his lightsaber. The Sith entered from the same corridor Relin had used. He wore the loose browns and blacks favored by dark side users. The red blade of his lightsaber filled the space between them. His scaly, reddish-brown skin was the color of blood. He strode among the scattered Misasi parts that littered the bloody floor of the chamber, his eye ridge cocked, a sneer curling his lip over one of the small horns that jutted from the side of his jaw. His long hair, bound into a rope with bone circlets, hung to his waist. I should have known it was you on my ship. Who else but a Jedi? Who else but Relin Druer? I learned such things from you. He shook his head, poked a Misasi corpse with a toe. It seems long ago now. You destroyed every life form on that planet. You learned nothing from me. Sayes laughed, the sound fat with contempt. I learned much from you, but it was not what you sought to teach. You should not have come here, Relin. But then you always were the fool. There are many things I should not have done. Sayes' eyes narrowed at that. Shouts carried from 3 of the corridors that opened onto the chamber. Relin said, Your servants will arrive soon. Sayes raised a clawed hand, and the blast doors closed, one after another, blocking the corridors from which Relin had heard the sounds of pursuit. This is between us, and is long overdue. Do you agree? They approached each other, circled at 4 paces, lightsabers blazing. Sayes was the taller between them, the physically stronger, but Relin was faster. I do. Relin's chrono continued its countdown. 33 seconds. I have missed your company from time to time, Sayes said, and Relin heard sincerity in the words. You have chosen a lonely path, Sayes. It is never too late to turn away. Sayes smiled around his horns, an expression that did not reach his eyes, and the hollowness of the expression reminded Relin of the gulf between the natures of his first Padawan and his second. You have chosen the lonely path. The Jedi teach denial of self. That is your weakness. No sentient can long abide that. The Sith embrace the self, and therein lies their strength. You understand so little, Relin said. The Jedi teach the interdependence of life, the understanding that all is connected. A flash of anger animated Sayes' eyes, and he spit at Relin's feet. A lie. You tried to steal what is best in me, to make me as empty as you. Relin sneered, but Sayes bored deeper. When is the last time you felt anything with passion? When is the last time you laughed, Relin? Felt a woman's touch? When? The words cut close to bone, echoing as they did Relin's own thoughts about his training of Drev. Sayes must have seen it in Relin's expression. Ah, I see you've thought of these matters yourself, and you were right to think them. It is never too late for you to learn wisdom. Join me, Relin. I will present you to Master Sado myself. I think not, Relin said. Very well, Sayes answered. He reached down to a pouch at his belt. May I? Relin knew what he would draw forth and nodded. Sayes removed a white memory mask from the pouch, placed it before his face. It adhered, shaping itself into a likeness of the skull of an Irkush, one of the largest predators on Kali. You used to wear a mask of real bone, Relin said. I reserve that now for only special prey, Sayes said, and attacked. And then it switches to the present, 41.5 years after the Battle of Yavin. Jaden's ship emerged from hyperspace, and the Navicomp automatically removed the tint of his cockpit window while R6 confirmed coordinates. Jaden checked the readout. They'd had a good jump and re-entered real space at the edge of the unknown regions. Well done, R6. Ahead, Faust spun through space. Night side facing out, he saw only an old WeatherSat and ComSat in orbit. Like many planets so far out on the rim, Faust had no orbital dock and processing station, no planetary defenses, no sign of Galactic Alliance bureaucracy at all. The population of Faust was on its own. He felt a sudden overwhelming impulse to throw away everything and start anew on some wild, independent backworld like Faust, free of rules and obligations. But he had enough self-awareness to recognize the feeling for what it was. A desire to run away from his old life, not a desire to run to a new one. He engaged the ion engines on his customized Z-95 and sped around the planet, outpacing its spin, chasing the day, until he saw the system's star crest the horizon line. Put us in geosynchronous orbit, R6, he said, and the droid complied. Jaden stared out the cockpit's window as the planet rotated into day. Light filled his cockpit and washed over the planet's surface by increments, unveiling a quilt of clouds floating over the red, orange, and tan of vast deserts, the blue smear of an ocean, the spine of a mountain range that ran the length of the main continent. To Jaden it was like watching the slow reveal of a masterful work of art, a sculpture of land and water, wondrous in its lonely, whirling trek through the emptiness of space. He always tried to see a star crest from orbit before setting foot on a planet. He wasn't sure why. Maybe he wanted to see every world in its best light before putting down on its surface. Unbidden, he recalled a star crest over Corellia that he'd seen from a viewport aboard Centerpoint Station as he and his strike force had moved through the metal maze of its corridors. He dismissed the memory quickly, pained by the realization that his actions on Centerpoint had polluted even this, one of the small pleasures he had long enjoyed. Frowning, he looked out the cockpit, past Faust, and into the field of stars that dotted the unknown regions. "There be dragons," he said, smiling. R6 beeped a question. "Something Kyle once said to me," Jaden explained. "What you seek can be found in the black hole on Faust." Faust's largest population center was Farpoint. He would start there, keep an ear to ground, and try to figure out how something could start in the lightlessness of a black hole. He'd pose as a salvager with old Imperial-era hulks to sell for scrap. The fact that he piloted a Z-95 would add credibility to the claim. "Why do I fly an old Z-95, R6? The droid beeped and whistled in answer. Though Jaden needed none, he flew the Z-95 for the same reason he still bore an old lightsaber in the small of his back. R6, set the comm to standard planetary control frequency. R6 chirped when it was done. "Farpoint Control, this is Far Wanderer, requesting permission to land." A long pause and the crackle of static answered his request. Before he could repeat it, the planetary control finally answered in basic. "Far Wanderer, permission granted. Coordinates for the yard are being transmitted to you now. What is that, a Z-95? How'd you get a hyperspace sled to stay attached to that old girl? We didn't know those antiques still flew." "Still flies, Farpoint Control, but it isn't always pretty." Laughter carried over the channel. "Bring that bird in." Predator settled into orbit over Faust, and Kell took in the planet. It was covered in great swaths of desert, stretches of tan and brown bisected by gashes of reds and smudges of black made the surface look scarred, bruised, wounded. He hovered over it for a time, his ship invisible to the meager scanning technology available to those on world. He studied the planet's specs on his console a final time. Apart from a few isolated settlements on the edge of the deserts, the planet had only one main population center, Farpoint, with a transient population of perhaps 3,500 sentients. He frowned, thinking that he would have to take care to keep his feeding discreet in such a small settlement. On the other hand, the small population limited the target of his inquiry. With his talents, he would be able to gather information rapidly. I see, we switched to the other guy in this timeline that feeds on people's brains. Okay. In his mind's eye, he saw the image Weirlock had burned into his brain. The icy moon hanging against the backdrop of the blue gas giant, its sky on fire. He stared past Faust, out at the trackless systems of the unknown regions. The moon could be anywhere. Weirlock had demanded that he look for a sign. Kell had another idea. He intended to look for a Jedi. Thinking of the rich soup of a Jedi caused his feeders to roil in their cheek sacks. Thinking of the soup of the one who would bring him a revelation caused him to drool. So, if you weren't here for the other two, when he says soup, that's what he means, is he actually goes in through, I don't remember if it was their nostrils. Anyway, he enters their head with his feeders and feeds on the soup of their brain. He stared down at the planet as the line of night crept across its surface, swallowing the deserts in darkness. "I am a ghost," he said. And that is the end of the chapter. That takes us to chapter 4, where it jumps back to the past, to the Harbinger and Omen. and the Jedi trying to stop it, and Seize and Rel having their duel, it looks like. So we will pick that up on Monday. So I will see you then for the Star Wars reading. I will be back in after just a few minutes break to start a new stream, and I'm playing Resident Evil 7 BioShock tonight. So see you in a few minutes.